Do you feel like your parent's parent? Maybe that's something you felt since you were a kid. If you grew up with a narcissistic or emotionally immature parent, you may have learned from a very early age that your role is to regulate, fix, take care of, and listen to. Now, there's nothing wrong with regulating and taking care of people, but there is something wrong with that when you're a kid. And the reason is you're developing and you're completely dependent and vulnerable. And you actually need the adults to take on those roles, so you get to just be a kid. Kids are supposed to play, learn, and develop. If they feel that their parents are so fragile, so vulnerable, that they won't survive without the kid's caretaking, then this will activate the child's defense mechanisms, therefore diverting energy from their typical development route to developing ways of surviving within that relationship dynamic. And if you need your parents to take care of you, and they seem really vulnerable and fragile without you, then one of the ways you might learn to survive is by being your mother's mother, by being your father's mother or father. This applies to all genders, people. So you become your parents' confidant, their therapist. You become their emotional crutch. And this becomes an inbuilt expectation in your relationship, to the point where you have to be hyper-responsible, hyper-regulated, or at least you try to do this. But you're constantly overwhelmed by this adult person's unresolved issues. Even now as an adult, you might find yourself sitting through the long calls, listening to them break down, complain, blame others. And you might even feel your energy draining away because these dynamics generally create a lot of stress for the caretaker. But at the same time, you've learned since when you were a child that your mom or your dad is really fragile and they need you to keep taking on this role. But here's the truth. That feeling of responsibility for keeping your parents together, that feeling of responsibility for your parents' emotional well-being, for their emotional survival, that's not love. That's enmeshment. And honestly, it was never your job as a kid, and it's certainly not your job now. There's a difference between being a supportive adult towards another supportive adult and being expected to be the only adult in the relationship. When a child grows up emotionally caretaking, they learn that love means taking care of other people. When a child grows up parentified, they learn that love means caretaking. That safety keeps from keeping that parent calm. So as adults, some of these individuals will replay these dynamics with their other relationships as well. They'll attract and choose people who need rescuing, fixing, managing. It may feel familiar, it may feel like home, but it's not sustainable or healthy. Because in enmeshed relationships, one person carries all of the emotional weight and sometimes the financial weight. All the while, the other party remains emotionally or financially or whatever undeveloped. And this keeps people stuck in that same dynamic. The caretaker is trapped in exhaustion and the dependent person is trapped in dependency. The thing is, fragility and dependency can also be a form of control. If you believe that I'm going to completely fall apart and not manage everyday situations without your presence, you might feel coerced into maintaining a certain level of contact with me that you don't actually want to maintain. And it's easy to feel compassion towards the parent that seems fragile, who complains, cries, and constantly shares their suffering. But when that fragility becomes a tool for emotional control, you start to realize that your compassion is being exploited. A narcissistic, borderline, histrionic, or antisocial parent might not even realize what they're doing. But their behavior still trains you to believe that your piece is a threat, that you must always put their pain first and their needs first. Hey guys, if you're getting any value from this video, then do subscribe, like, comment below, and also download your Break the Chains PDF, 10 Steps to Stop Your Narcissistic Parents' Control. You can find the link in the description below. This channel is about breaking free from psychological control when it comes to narcissistic parents. But when I say narcissistic, I am not talking just about people who have narcissistic personality disorder or could be diagnosed with that. I'm talking about people who objectify other people, exploit them, and believe that they are entitled to more care than other people. So all people who think like this, narcissists, borderlines, histrionics, antisocials, obviously I'm talking about people who are not working on themselves and changing their behavior. All of these people are within the narcissism spectrum. So it really doesn't matter whether they'd be diagnosed in this fashion or in that fashion. Now let's be clear, unless your parent has dementia, psychosis, a severe physical limitation or something in that regard, then their emotional fragility is their responsibility. I don't ever want to sit here and just convince people that there aren't people who legitimately need care, who will not make it by themselves. People who are ill, people who have certain conditions, they will need outside support. But your empathy and compassion doesn't have to mean endless availability. As a matter of fact, it can't mean that. As therapists, we learned that we must create an empathic environment for the therapy relationship. But we also learned that empathy must be limited. We can't teach people that anyone is eternally and unconditionally available for all of their whims. Now, we really have to make it clear that being empathetic or compassionate in a limitless way will harm you. And that's why you're in the right when it comes to setting boundaries. You might notice that after every conversation, you feel drained, tense, tired, heavy, like your nervous system is overwhelmed. That's because you're feeling emotionally invaded. You're absorbing guilt, negativity, and despair that don't belong to you, and that as a child, you weren't even equipped to deal with. And when we're constantly looking outwards to maintain someone else's functioning, we lose contact with our inner lives, with our sense of self, with our needs, with our values. You don't have a space to rest, create, or feel joy. Your body starts associating peace with danger, because if you ever have peace, it's gonna be just a few more moments before there's another crisis. This is not connection. This is emotional entrapment disguised as love. And it's not just that there's a sensation of feeling drained. When we're dealing with chronically dependent people who have consistent crises, this will activate our self-defense mechanism. When we are exposed to prolonged periods of chronic stress, this will also alter our neurological system. Mind you, human beings were absolutely made to deal with stress. As a matter of fact, we were made to grow with stress, but we are not equipped to deal with prolonged, uninterrupted chronic stress. This is the number one factor that will contribute to people developing psychological and physical illnesses: prolonged stress. Such prolonged stress will elevate your cortisol levels, and in the long run, this can actually shrink your hippocampus. This results in memory problems, difficulty concentrating. You're not just going to experience brain fog. Your memories are going to become fragmented in such a way that you will constantly be experiencing the physiological reactions to stress, but not be able to identify what you're actually reacting to, because the memory of the stressful situation gets dissociated from the actual physiological reaction. So you're constantly reacting, but you don't identify it as a trauma trigger because you can't remember what the reaction is associated to. Prolonged stress causes prefrontal cortex atrophy and dysfunction. So the prefrontal cortex is associated with things like impulse control, emotional regulation, as well as decision making. And when it's impaired, it will impact your ability to regulate your emotions. If you can't regulate your emotions, you can't think clearly, and you're more susceptible to manipulation. Chronic stress will also create amygdala enlargement and hypersensitivity. So the amygdala is the brain's alarm system. It's the brain threat processing system, and it will become enlarged and hypersensitive to threats. This heightened sensitivity makes people more prone to anxiety, disorders at large. You'll start having fight or flight responses to even minor stressors, and you'll have a really hard time finally getting down to base level and regulating. Essentially, it's a shit show for your emotional regulation, your ability to think clearly, and your ability to identify that you're even dealing with trauma. And that's why being constantly exposed to someone else's never-ending crises actually alters our neural pathways and traumatizes and harms us. And that's why you have the right to set boundaries and not want to be your mother's mother, your father's mother, or father, your mother's father, or whatever it is anymore. But what does a healthy adult-child dynamic even look like? Well, in a healthy parent-child dynamic, each person takes responsibility for their own inner worlds. And there's room for both people to have emotions, needs, limits, because one person's issues aren't always taking the forefront. But in enmeshment, only one person gets to be fragile, emotional, and receive special treatment. The other person becomes the listener, the stabilizer, the grown-up, the functional one. But a healthy bond feels balanced because you can say no without the risk of a meltdown. The other person won't collapse or rage just because you said no to them. You can actually rest without feeling guilt for abandoning this really fragile person who can't act as an adult. You can share your own reality without being punished or having your pain be compared to theirs. And conveniently enough, theirs always comes out on top as being more important and therefore demanding more attention. If none of these are true in your relationship, then what you're managing isn't fragility, it's dependency and control. And this is where most adult children freeze. You know you want distance, you know you want space, but you feel that they will literally fall apart without you. But the reality is, you caretaking for them and being parentified even in your adult phase doesn't do anybody any good. And also, if your parent is on the narcissism spectrum, you weren't the one that caused that. Having compassion for the fact that they have a personality functioning that doesn't serve them doesn't mean you let yourself get stepped over all the time. You may not be guilty for the way that things are, for the pain that your mother or father might be dealing with, but you are responsible for changing your part in that dynamic. And that means you have the right to set boundaries even when they're uncomfortable and even when you expect backlash, even when the whole family system is going to rage against you. As a matter of fact, if you're going to stop the caretaking role, then expect retaliation. Most narcissistic parents will not respect your new boundaries. They will retaliate. They will test, guilt trip, and reject. The pushback might look like them saying something like, after everything I've done for you, or I know I'm just a burden, I'm just a bad parent, which is really not a way of taking accountability. It's just another way of guilt tripping you for making them feel bad for the fact that they were acting wrongly in the first place. You might be called ungrateful. These are just emotional hooks to provoke you emotionally into feeling guilt or shame and going back to your caretaking role. This might be a good moment for us to take a look at the difference between guilt and responsibility. You are not guilty for your parents' pain, but you are responsible for your happiness. You're not abandoning a defenseless, fragile child. You're ceasing to be a free therapist to a capable adult. It's not your job to manage their pain. Being a human being doesn't mean being a therapist to your mom or dad. You're not guilty for your parents not being able to hold on to internal happiness and satisfaction. You did not create their personality structure. When you were born into the world, they already had that personality structure. You're not responsible for the life choices that led them to this point. The weight of their pain is not yours to carry. The weight of their pain is already creating psychological weight inside of you and probably altering your neurological system as we speak. Your parent is an adult. They are responsible for their own mental health, and the fact that they choose not to do this is tragically their decision. You can feel compassion without sacrificing or harming yourself. You can wish them healing without being their therapist. And that's what emotional adulthood looks like. And if you don't train that type of emotional adulthood, let's be clear, the chances that you're only going to have this particular type of reality with your parents are very slim. You're probably going to transfer this caretaking dynamic onto other relationships as well, because you're operating from this core sense of self that you built throughout your life that is deeply grounded in this belief that your only worth for other people is in how much you take care of them. It might have never crossed your mind that you're worthy just for being you. That love doesn't mean endless pain. So long as you identify with the fixer role, or even worse, so long as you want to be validated and applauded for being the fixer, you will have secondary gains from being in that role. If you can slowly build a sense of self that doesn't require that you be in the fixer role, that requires reciprocity, equality, equal distribution of responsibility in all relationships, except for the ones with children, obviously. If you can survive not needing to be applauded for being a do-gooder, people-pleasing goody two-shoes, then not only will you actually start building reciprocal, lighter relationships, but you will also overcome your fear of not getting that specific type of validation. There is also a place where caretakers like to be seen as caretakers because they're strong, needed, important. Now, if you want to know more about a step-by-step protocol I've used with thousands of adult children of narcissists around the world over the past 10 years that has taken submissive, guilt-tripped, controlled children of narcissists. Now, this is the protocol that has helped transform scared, guilty, paralyzed adult children of narcissists into badasses that call the shots in their own lives, know how to deal with guilt, manipulation, shame, flying monkeys, and no longer feel psychologically controlled by their family system. If you identify with that sort of work, if that looks like something that could be useful for you, then keep an eye out for the launch of our Break the Chains program. So let me ask you a question before we end the video. What are you really scared of? If you stop being your narcissistic parents' parents or therapist, what are you afraid will happen? Let me know in the comments below what the core of your fear is. And if you thought this video was interesting, you might like this other video as well.